Welcome to Aging Gracefully. My name is Catherine Eyring and I have a special show today. In September 2018, I met my dear friend Jill out in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Now you might be thinking, why would we be in that little remote town? But Jill and I went to school together in Fairview Park, Ohio. Through a series of events, we both ended up in school at Western Wyoming College in Rock Springs. So, September we went back, we spent a few days together, and this was a really important time for us. The reason is, it was almost 40 years ago that she and I were together when, for me, I had this traumatic event of a phone call from my sister telling me that my mother had just passed away in a car accident. It was a horrific time. And for me, I came home and didn't finish school there. Jill, on the other hand, continued on with school, but I didn't realize she fell into the trap of drugs and alcohol, and she is now celebrating 30 years of sobriety. I think it's important that we talk about drugs and alcohol. It's so pervasive in our society, in our culture, and I think we're just kidding ourselves if we don't talk about it. Jill is a wonderful example of being able to share her experience for someone else to learn from. In fact, I love the expression she has that her past is her greatest asset. So Jill and I met in a hotel in Rock Springs, and we decided we were going to be videoing a lot of our conversations. We first sat down and immediately got emotional. So first we had to get past that. So Jill and I started talking about how we ever even ended up in Rock Springs, Wyoming, when we were both born and raised in the Cleveland, Ohio area. But it was a strange turn of events where my mother's friend had remarried to a man who lived in Rock Springs. I had gone out to visit her, found this beautiful school at the top of a mountain, and I went to school there. But the next year, I, let's say, invited Jill to come back with me, but I often say, really, I dragged her.
If you hadn't asked me
Who would think?
that many years ago, do you want to go to Wyoming with Rock Springs with me?
I always say that I dragged my girlfriend out there, but then she stayed.
Uh-huh.
And
it's true. I know. And when I lived in Rock Springs and we'd people would drive to Jackson for a weekend to get out of Rock Springs, and we'd all wished we could live up there, and somehow I made it work. I took the leap and never looked back.
We were talking just earlier, just minutes ago, about why did we lose touch? How did we lose touch? We were so close, and then we remembered, well, that's right. Phone calls were long distance. We didn't have the money to pay for long distance calls.
There was no internet. There was no Facebook.
No email.
No email.
Yeah, and as 20-year-olds, we just weren't into writing letters.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I know.
So many years went by.
I know.
So Jill and I had really different reasons for wanting to revisit our past. For me, it was the pain of losing my mother while I was there, and I wanted to go back to the place where I was when I had the phone call, the horrific phone call telling me that my mother was gone. I was with Jill that evening, and I remember every detail, but I was always curious, what did Jill remember, and were our memories the same? As it turns out, hers were really very vague, whereas for me, I swear I remember every single detail. So I wanted to talk about a subject that is really, really hard for me. Because I was 20 years old with you almost 40 years ago on the day when I suddenly got a phone call that my mother had just been killed in a car accident. So I have my memories of exactly how that went, and we've never talked about this. So I'll spare you some of the details and the pain, but we shared tears and did talk extensively about that experience that evening. And then we gathered ourselves up and we got back to the film again. So do you think that you've said, I love you enough in your 60 years of living?
I would say yes. That's something I learned from you, Kathy, when your mother died, and we were in our apartment and at the college. I remember you regretting that you hadn't said I love you to your mother the last time you were on the phone, and that stayed with me all these years. So when I talk to someone I care about, I always tell them I love them before I hang up.
So who would have thought that something that was so traumatic to me was actually something that brought good into Jill's life? That she remembered to always say, I love you to people she cares about, because she didn't want to ever have a regret that she didn't say those words. So you have this one expression, I have to ask you again about what you said about what a past brings to your present. How did you?
So, we all have a history. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. Sometimes there's baggage, shame, humiliation attached to it. And until I worked through that history in recovery, where I attached shame and guilt and humiliation to it and hated the things I had done, I just wanted to wipe it away and erase it. But when I got clean and sober, I learned that my past is my greatest asset, meaning that my past could help someone else somewhere or somehow, whether it's in recovery or just in everyday conversation.
And it's helped you.
It's helped
Because
me.
you have the inner strength that you have.
I've
as a
accepted.
result.
I've accepted who I've accepted who I am and what I've been through, and it's made me who I am today.
Which is awesome.
Which is awesome. Same here. Back at ya.
So I know there are many people who have regrets about their past, but I love the way Jill can frame her past, that she says her past is her greatest asset. I love the way she uses her experiences to help other people. Jill is very open about being in a 12-step program for 30 years. She's very open about her experiences in order to perhaps keep someone else from suffering as much as she did.
A friend of mine had put an AA book after a blackout drunk of mine. He put an AA book on my coffee table with a note saying, please don't be offended. You can read it and draw your own conclusions. If you have any questions, ask me. And so I grabbed it and I was really angry. And that night I remember laying in bed and reading some of it, and some of what I read was me, and it scared me and it made me angry, and I threw it under my bed. One more time, a week goes by, I pull it out again. So we planted a seed. Several weeks later I went to my first meeting with him. I didn't have a good experience.
At the meeting?
At the meeting, they segregated me. They had newcomers in a separate room from everyone else.
Which wasn't typical.
No, and I
Okay.
learned that once I got sober, it was not typical. But I believe that things happen for a reason. I wasn't ready. So I was really angry and I kept drinking, from that time on, I kept drinking. In November, I drove to Ohio to visit my mother. And I tried really hard to hide my drinking, and I drank a lot and tried to hide it from her. My birthday's in December, and about a week after we got back from that trip, she sent me a birthday card with a little note saying "Open last," all taped up. So I was turning 30, and I opened it last, and she said, "Jill, the best present that you could give yourself, is to quit drinking." And she went on, and in some heartfelt ways, and that really stuck with me. My husband at the time had a surprise 30th birthday for me, the keg and drinks and drugs, and I kind of half-heartedly drank and did some drugs, and it was all half-hearted. And I woke up on Christmas morning that year, and I didn't want to drink anymore, so I reached out to the AA hotline, and they had someone take me to a meeting. And I thought to myself, if this doesn't work, I'm going to go to treatment. 30 years later, I've never been to treatment, and here I am, and I've been sober ever since.
Yeah, and that is amazing.
It is amazing.
And that's not even to say that other people shouldn't take the other route. Because
Absolutely.
whatever is best for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What works for one person can be completely different for another.
Mm-hmm. We all have our own path, and again, it was nothing extraordinary. It's interesting because all the years, probably the last 10 years of my drinking or longer, I really didn't want to drink, but I didn't know how to stop. And it was nothing extraordinary. I just was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and these little seeds that were planted those last 4 months before I got sober is what got me to that point, and I believe a higher power intervened.
And how fortunate. Just because you and I both know, sometimes the sobering moment is something so horrific
Mm-hmm.
that it can't be undone.
Mm-hmm. And we all have our different, my bottom wasn't rock bottom,
Mhm.
but for me emotionally, it was rock bottom.
Another thing I so love and admire about my friend Jill is that she believes that there's a higher power that helped her, that she just couldn't do what she did on her own. She reached her version of a rock bottom, and from there she knew she really had to do the work. And this is what brought her to this amazing person that she is now. So, do you believe that you have like a superpower in life? Something that's really helped you to get through your hard times?
Yes, I think my superpower is my higher power, whom I choose to call God at this point. Prayer and working through things, using my higher power, knowing that when I'm going through hard times, I can let go and let God, as they say in the program.
Do you feel like you've lived life fully?
No, I
You
have.
still have more to come?
I'm on my journey. I have a ways to go.
That being said, how old do you want to live to be?
I hope perhaps to live to be 100 if I'm healthy and not and have all my faculties about me.
And I can see you, even at 100 years, having the kind of life that would be beneficial to others as well. I'm sure, without you having said it, I know you well enough to know that will always be a priority to you too. But if you could go back to a specific date or time in your life, would you?
Yes.
Tell me.
I remember a time, I was about 10 years old, I learned to swim. And I was very good at it. In fact, the swimming instructors were so surprised at how adept I was in the water. In about 4 months' time, I got my all my badges, and I was a swimmer. It's beginner, advanced, intermediate, and swimmer, and I got all those badges within a 4-month period. I was a fish in the water, and I feel had I stayed on that path, I think my life would be totally different today.
Maybe easier.
Maybe easier.
And yet maybe you wouldn't be the quality person you are now.
That's true. I think through hardships, I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot, and the hardships aren't over. It's what we do with the bumps in the road.
True.
It's what I do with the bumps in the road.
My observation, just even in the last, not even 24 hours that we've been together, maid service comes to the door. You're not just like nothings. You're especially kind with everyone you talk to. Your manners aren't just polite. They're sincere. I notice.
Something someone told me once. First of all, I have a lot of respect for all walks of life. We all have a job in the world. To some people, the maid that cleans the hotel room, or the service worker at the restaurant, or some people treat others beneath them. We all have a job, and we're all equal. Something someone told me once that stuck with me is that people may not remember what you say, but they always remember how you make them feel. And that has stuck with me,
And I think, just like what you mentioned with the high school conversation, sometimes that one little nice thing that you could say or do, you just don't know how far-reaching it is.
Right.
Then, of course, I had to ask Jill some of the same questions I ask all my other guests. So, Jill, what do you think is the best gift someone could give a senior citizen, an elderly person?
Your attention. I have such respect for older people and their wisdom and their knowledge and what they've been through, and I love to hear their stories. I think in our society, our senior citizens and older people don't get the respect and attention that they deserve.
Do you have any ideas how a community could help seniors to feel more valuable?
I really don't, other than engagement. We have a senior citizen community, we have a senior apartments, we have a senior center. I think that community, we could hold more programs for all members of the community at the senior center, which would engage both young and old.
The intergenerational work, I love that. I love programs that mix the young and old. I have a problem with the separation.
I do too.
Because I really think it's the youth that keeps us feeling energized. It's important to be together with the youth. Here's a question. What do you think is the best medicine for heartbreak or loss? Which certainly by 60 years old, we've grieved. We've had heartbreak of some sort.
What comes to mind for me is accepting it, feeling it, plowing through it, working through it, allowing all those feelings. In the grieving circle, there's, your first feeling for me was anger. I was so angry, and rather than dismiss that and deny that, I let myself just feel it fully. And by feeling all of those emotions around that grief or that loss or that hurt, it allowed me to walk through it and get to the other side a better person, having grown a little bit and learned a little bit more. I wouldn't be the person I am today had I not allowed myself to feel all the feelings that surround those losses, whether it be death, whether it be death of a human, death of a marriage, death of a friendship, hurt by a loved one. I think it's so important to allow yourself to feel all of that.
Okay. Jill, I just want to say thank you for this wonderful weekend. I love you.
And I love you. This has been a very, it's been a deep weekend in a really positive way. I've taken some nuggets from you that I'll carry with me.
And you as well, for me. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You know what? I can only wish for any viewers that they would have a dear friend that they could be as close with as we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'll just say, too, that when we got together on Friday evening, we just kind of had an agreement that there was nothing either of us could ever say
Mm-hmm.
that would make us dislike each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're just too solid in our relationship.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I would like to share as well is with regard to judgment and or not judging people. I always try to remember there, but for the grace of God go I, because it could be me walking in those shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I remember that, I have more compassion for another person. I may not understand what they're going through, but I'm able to look at them and realize, if they're going down that path, it could be me going down that path tomorrow. You never know. So that's stuck with me over the years. How could I judge another person? How could I judge you? To me, that's what life is about, is not judging people, accepting people for who they are, and loving them anyway.
Right. I think that gives us practice, too, for accepting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you for taking the time to join in and watch my friend Jill talk about the hardships that she went through. I love this woman, and she has had a wonderful God-given recovery. But this is a time where we have drugs so deep in our society and our culture. And I think it's best if we start taking a different view to eliminate the stigma attached to it, be able to talk about it, be more upfront about it. And so I honor my friend Jill for having been so brave and courageous and telling her story. And for you, my viewers, if you have a comment, please put your comments below, or feel free to email me and reach out, and let's continue the conversation.